Hello everyone, welcome to GCSE English. We are on week 18 this week. Hope you're all okay and you've all had a good weekend. So hopefully you know the drill by now. You should have logged onto your Google Meet that's in the Google Classroom stream, just so your tutors know you're here and so they can explain what it is that you're doing today. Also, if you've got any questions, that's where you can ask them. They'll direct you to this lesson anyway, and you will watch the entire video and you will complete all the activities on there. So last week we had a bit of a big week because we were looking at the reading section. We were recapping question 4, that how far do you agree question, difficult question. And we also had a go at writing a speech. Now, a speech is something that can come up on section B, the writing section on paper 2. That's why we're practicing it. In a couple of weeks, we'll also practice other formats of writing as well, just so you've got experience of all the ones that could come up. For today, though, we are just going to stick with the reading prep. So we're just with section A. So we've done questions 1 to 4 so far. So the only 2 we've got left are 5 and 6. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. And the theme is travel writing, which is why we've got 2 pictures of Blackpool and Verona. Okay, so let's get started. Question 5 and 6. One is worth 4 marks, one is worth 10 marks. Question 5, in my opinion, is the easiest question on paper 2, although it is usually the worst answered. So hopefully in this video, I'll make it really clear what you've got to do. And question 6, in my opinion, is the hardest question on the paper. And often people don't answer this question because they run out of time, which is why it's so important that you practice the timings when you're going through these activities. So when I ask you to pause the video for 15 minutes or for 20 minutes, please only take that amount of time in order to do the activities, because what we're doing is we're practicing those timings. So for question 5, the key skill is summarising. So we're going to summarise the attitudes of the writers. Now, the key thing to notice which is different today is that we're looking at 2 different texts. Remember, in paper 2, you have a 19th century text and you also have a 21st century text. So question 1 and 2 usually deal with the 19th century text. Question 3 and 4 usually deal with the 21st century text. And then question 5 and 6, you need both of the texts together, which is why it's a little bit more difficult. So summarising attitudes and perspectives is question 5. And for question 6, we're going to be comparing the attitudes and the perspectives. The good thing is, though, when you've done question 5, it makes question 6 a lot easier because actually you've sometimes already picked out a lot of the ideas in question 5 that you can also use in question 6. And as always, we need to make sure that we are using quotes from the text and embedding them, if we can, into our points to make sure that we are backing up everything that we say. Remember, no quotes, no marks. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to read our first document. So this is an extract that was taken from a travel log, which was written by Charles Dickens, very famous author. I'm sure you've all heard of him. However, this is him writing non-fiction. He travelled with his family through Italy in 1846, and this is a particular extract from his travel diary about Verona. Might have heard of Verona. I don't know if anyone's been to Verona. Beautiful city, famous for its Roman amphitheatre, but also famous for being the setting of Romeo and Juliet. Okay, so what you need to do is find the documents. So remember, we just go to classwork. When you're on, this is the classwork stream, the normal stream for classroom. You just click on classwork and you just need to find week 18 because that's the week we're on this week. So week 18, it's called Blackpool versus Verona, paper 2, question 5 and question 6. You'll be able to see the video here, and then maybe in a different place, usually the top right, you can see your documents. Remember, wherever the big purple turn it in button is, that's where your documents will be. So if you can't see them here, don't worry, just have a look around or make sure that you've clicked view assignment or open assignment. Mine looks a little bit different to yours does because I'm a tutor in this classroom, not a student. There are 2 documents, remember, and then also your answers as well. But the first thing we're interested in is the Charles Dickens one. So I'm just going to open that up. It's called Charles Dickens, Verona, 19th Century. So we'll read this together. So please follow along. If you want to pause the video while you open it up, that's absolutely fine. And I will read this now. Pleasant Verona, with its beautiful old palaces and charming country in the distance, seen from terrace walks and stately balustered galleries, with its great Roman gates still spanning the fair streets and casting on the sunlight of today the shade of 1500 years ago, with its marble-fitted churches, lofty towers, rich architecture, and quaint old quiet thoroughfares where shouts of Montagues and Capulets once resounded, with its fast-rushing river, picturesque old bridge, great castle, waving cypresses, and prospects so delightful and so cheerful, pleasant Verona. In the midst of it, in the Piazza di Bra, is the great Roman amphitheatre, so well preserved and carefully maintained that every row of seats is there, unbroken. Over certain of the arches, the old Roman numerals may yet be seen, and there are corridors and staircases and passages and winding ways above ground and below. Nesting in some of the shadows and hollow places of the walls now are a few small dealers of one kind or other, and there are green weeds and leaves and grass upon the parapet, but little else is greatly changed. When I had traversed all about it with great interest and had gone up to the topmost round of seats, and turning from the lovely panorama closed in by the distant Alps, looked down onto the building, it seemed to lie before me like the inside of a hat of plaited straw. The comparison is a homely and fantastic one, in sober remembrance and on paper, but it was irresistibly suggested at that moment nevertheless. I walked through and through the town all the rest of the day and could have walked there until now, I think. In one place, there was a very pretty modern theatre where they had just performed the opera, always popular in Verona, of Romeo and Juliet. Anywhere, in the churches, among the palaces, in the streets, on the bridge, or down beside the river, it was always pleasant Verona, and in my remembrance, always will be. Okay, so that's the 19th century text that we are going to be working with. I appreciate there's lots of language in there that is very 19th century that you might not have come across before. There is a little bit of a glossary which explains some of the things for you. But basically, Charles Dickens is talking about he's being in Verona and he's describing the landscape. He's describing the amphitheatre. He compares it to a hat of plaited straw. And he just talks about the view and how beautiful everything is. So it's very, very positive, this one. Okay, so do you remember how to summarize? Remember, this is the key skill that we are working on in question 5. So do you remember how to summarize or what summarizing even means? Feel free to jot down some notes if you want to pause this or maybe just shout at the screen. When you're summarizing, what you're doing is you're taking something that's really, really big and you're shortening it down into something that's a bit smaller. Think about when we were practicing plots in creative writing, and I gave you some film titles and I asked you to summarize the plot. So instead of talking, in detail about the 3-hour plot, you were able, some of you, in just under a minute, to quickly summarize what the plot was. And the way you did that was that you picked out the highlights, the things that were important. So when we're being asked to summarize, we just need to remember that we're being asked to find the main ideas of something. What are the most important things that you are going to take away from that film or from that piece of writing? And then for this question 5, you're being asked to write them in your own words. So we're looking at something quite large, we're finding the main points, and we are briefly sort of writing them again in our own words. So we're making something that's really big, small. Okay, so I want you to bear that in mind for our first activity, which is summarising bullet points, 3 things Dickens thinks about Verona. So remember, our own words. So I don't want you to just directly quote from the text because that wouldn't be your own words. 3 things, and because they're bullet pointed, obviously they're going to be quite short and snappy. Now, I want to show you on the classroom. People keep getting quite confused about this. It's really, really simple, or hopefully I've made it really simple this week. Week 18, your answers. If you open that document, it says 3 things Dickens thinks about Verona, and that's what we're working on right now. So all you need to do is type your 3 answers, or what would be your 3 bullet points, remember? Because I think I asked you to bullet point, don't I? Yeah, 3 things Dickens thinks about Verona. So can you write your 3 things that he thinks about Verona in those spaces where it says 1, 2, 3? So you're going to need to pause this video now. You're going to need to look back at the document, read over it again yourself, and can you summarise 3 things that you think he thinks about Verona? And you just want you to write your answers in here. Okay, so pause the video now and do that for me. Okay, hopefully we've got 3 things that we think Dickens, 3 things, sorry, we think Dickens thinks about Verona. Next up, we are going to read our second text. Now, this one is written by a man named Bill Bryson. It's called Notes from a Small Island. Now, Bill Bryson is a writer. His writing is known to be quite humorous. He's actually American, but he has lived in this country for over 20 years and he's travelled all around it. And in this book, he basically writes about all the different places that he's visited. In the extract that we're going to read, he focuses on his visit to Blackpool. Okay, so if you go to Google Classroom again, you should be able to see the document that says Bill Bryson Blackpool. And if you just open that one up, that's the second one that we're going to read. This is going to be our second text. So you might just want to pause the video very quickly just to make sure you can open that up. And then I will read this if you can follow along. Blackpool, and I don't care how many times you hear this, it never stops being ludicrous, attracts more visitors every year than Greece and has more holiday beds than the whole of Portugal. It consumes more chips per capita than anywhere else on the planet, has the largest concentration of roller coasters in Europe, and its 42-acre pleasure beach has 6.5 million annual visitors. Oh, and on Friday and Saturday nights, it has more public toilets than anywhere else in Britain. Elsewhere, they call them doorways. In the past 20 years, during a period in which the number of Britons taking traditional seaside holidays has declined by 1/5, Blackpool has increased its visitor numbers by 7% and built tourism into a 250 million a year industry. No small achievement when you consider the British climate, the fact that Blackpool is ugly, dirty, and a long way from anywhere, that its sea is an open toilet, and its attractions nearly all cheap, provincial, and dire. It was the illuminations that had brought me there. I had been hearing and reading about them for so long that I was genuinely keen to see them. So after securing a room in a modest guest house on a back street, I hastened to the front in a sense expectation. Well, all I can say is that Blackpool's illuminations are nothing if not splendid, and they are not splendid. There is, of course, always a danger of disappointment when you finally encounter something that you have wanted to see for a long time. But in terms of letdown, it would be hard to exceed Blackpool's light show. I thought there would be lasers sweeping the sky, strobe lights tattooing the clouds, and other gasp-making dazzlements. Instead, there was just a rumbling procession of old trams decorated as rocket ships or Christmas crackers, and several miles of paltry decorations on lampposts. I suppose if you had never seen electricity in action, it would be pretty breathtaking, but I'm not even sure of that. It all just seemed tacky and inadequate on a rather grand scale, like Blackpool itself. What was no less amazing than the meagreness of the illuminations were the crowds of people who had come to witness the spectacle. Traffic along the front was bumper to bumper, with childish faces pressed to the windows of every creeping car, and there were masses of people ambling happily along the spacious promenade. At frequent intervals, hawkers sold luminous necklaces and bracelets or other short-lived diversions, and were doing a roaring trade. I read somewhere once that half of all visitors to Blackpool have been there at least 10 times. Goodness knows what they find in the place. I walked for a mile or so along the prom and couldn't understand the appeal of it. I couldn't wake up any enthusiasm for it at all. I wandered through brightly lit arcades and peered in bingo halls, but the festive atmosphere that seemed to seize everyone failed to rub off on me. Eventually, feeling very tired and very foreign, I retired to a fish restaurant on a side street and prepared for another early night. Okay, so that is our second text, which was written by Bill Bryson on Blackpool. This one, I think, a little bit more accessible. Hopefully you agree that the tone of it, it's supposed to be quite humorous, quite tongue-in-cheek. He clearly doesn't like Blackpool very much. He's not had a great time there. He doesn't see the appeal of it, although everybody else seems to be very excited about it. Okay, so what I want you to do is the same as you just did for Charles Dickens. So I would like you to summarize in bullet points 3 things that Bryson thinks about Blackpool. So again, on your answer sheet, the next one underneath should say 3 things Bryson thinks about Blackpool. And I just want you to write your 3 things there where it says 1, 2, 3. Remember, you're being asked to summarize, so it needs to be in your own words. So please don't just take quotes directly from the text, because that's not what you're being asked to do. 3 things that he thinks about Blackpool in your own words, but keep them nice and short, yeah, as the bullet points dictate. And you are going to have to just quickly go over this again, this text that we've just read, to find those things. Okay, so pause the video now for me, just 5 minutes, and can you write down the 3 things that Bryson thinks about Blackpool? Okay, hopefully we've got 3 things. Well done. All I want you to do now is I just want you to look at your bullet points for each text and just make a note if any of them are the same. So on your answer sheet, you should have filled these 3 in now. So are they both completely different, or are any of them the same? The reason I'm asking you to do this is because it might help you with question 5, which we're going to look at now, and it also might help you with question 6. Okay, maybe if any of them are the same, you could just highlight which ones you think are the same, or put a star next to them or something like that, just so you're aware if any of them are the same. Okay, brilliant. So let's have a look then at actual exam style question for question 5. Now, what you've got to do, as I said, you've got to summarize information from both of the texts that you're given. Now, it will be on a specific theme. You should try and summarize 2 ideas from each text, because it's a 4-mark question. So you're going to get a mark for each idea that you summarize. So obviously there's no point in writing 10 different things if you're only going to get 4 marks. You do not need to quote the text in this question. It is the only question like this that you don't need to back up what you say with a quote. The key to remembering that is to read the question carefully, because it will always say in your own words. If you do use quotes, that's fine. You're not going to be penalised for using quotes, but you just don't need to do it in this question. And the information that you summarise, it could be similar or it could be different across the 2 texts. It doesn't matter. Okay, so if we look at a question then, using information from both texts, that's really important, both texts, briefly explain in your own words what each writer thought of Blackpool and Verona. And you can see it's worth 4 marks. So when I said it was going to be on a theme, This one, it's quite broad, isn't it? What each writer thought about Blackpool and Verona. So as long as you are aware of the writer's thoughts, you should be okay. And hopefully you can now see why me asking you to write down 3 things Dickens thinks about Verona and 3 things Bryson thinks about Verona might help you in this question. If you can't, you might want to go onto that Google Meet and ask for some help. Now, the way that I would start this, I would put in Dickens's text, and then I would maybe write down 2 things that he thinks of Verona. And then I would say in Bryson's text, and I would write down 2 things that he thinks about Blackpool. Now, if you're talking about different things, that's fine. Or maybe from that last activity, you highlighted things that were the same. So maybe it's in Dickens's text, he thinks this, this, and this. And in Bryson's text, similarly, he thinks the same because he thinks this and this and this. As long as it's in your own words, you don't need to quote, and you only need 2 different things for each one. Okay, so pause the video, give yourself 10 minutes, no more, and write down in the Dickens's text and give me 2 things he thinks of Verona, and in Bryson's 2 things he thinks of Blackpool. Look back at your bullet points to help you. Okay, excellent. So hopefully we've had a go at that. I'm going to show you the answers that I have written down, although this is not the gospel. You could have written lots of different things. These are just the ones that I happen to choose. So the first thing I say is in the Dickens text, he really likes walking through Verona. That's my first point. He also thinks it had a beautiful theatre. That's my second point. He will always remember it fondly. So actually, I've written 3 things there and I only needed 2. I'm just showing off. So he really likes walking through it and he thinks it had a beautiful theatre. In Bryson's text, he didn't enjoy being in Blackpool because he thinks it's dirty and was disappointed by the attractions. So I've got 2 points there. 1, he thinks it's dirty. 2, disappointed by the attractions. The third point I've got is unnecessary. I'm just showing off. He also felt out of place. Now, if you can really quickly do this, there's nothing to stop you writing 3 things if you can find 3 things. But it's only a 4-mark question, remember, so you do only need 2. I've just put an extra one there for a little bit of insurance because I found the others really quickly. Okay, and that is as simple as question 5 needs to be. In Dickens's text, he really likes walking through Verona and he thinks it had a beautiful theatre. Whereas in Bryson's text, he didn't like being in Blackpool because he thinks it's dirty and was disappointed by the attractions. That is as simple as it can be, and that will get you 4 marks. And 4 marks can sometimes be the difference between a grade 3 and a grade 4. If you have any questions, anything that you're not sure about, go onto that Google Meet now and ask those questions. Remember, no question is a stupid question. In the KC numbers on Google Classroom, where you do your ILP work, there is some activities where you can practice question 5, the summary. So if you want to do a little bit more practice, by all means, head over to Google Classroom and have a look at those KCs for that one. All right, let's move on then to question 6, our final question of the lesson. So question 6, as I said, I think this is a very hard question and there's lots of reasons why. However, it's nothing that you haven't already practiced, nothing that you haven't already done in the reading section. Now, what you're going to be asked to do is compare the writers' views. So this is why it's hard, because you're using both texts. And in this one, you do have to quote the text. Although the information could be similar or different in the comparison. So it might be like a compare contrast kind of thing. You must put quotes in this one. And you also need to make clear which text you're talking about. So I will show you and start you off with some examples to make it clear. Now, this question, you can talk about language in here, you can talk about format, you can talk about structure, you can talk about tone, you can talk about anything you want really, as long as you feel confident doing so. But remember, there is no point in just picking out language features or feature spotting. You know, oh, Dickens uses a metaphor. You're not going to get any marks for knowing a metaphor is a metaphor. You're going to get the marks for explaining what that metaphor means. Okay, because that's you inferring meaning, showing that you understand what you've read, and that's what you're getting the marks for in this question. So we're going to compare the writer's views across two texts. We're going to answer the question the exact same way as we do as question 2 and question 4. Point, evidence, point, evidence, point, evidence. It's a 10 marker. So again, our target is going to be about 8 points, supported by 8 different quotes. So let's look at the question. Both of these texts are pieces of travel writing. Compare the writer's attitudes to the places they have visited, how the writers get across their attitudes to the readers. So the how bit is the bit where you're going to be using your evidence. And that's where you might talk about, when I said here, the language, the format, the structure, or the tone. But generally, we're just concerned with comparing the writers' attitudes. Okay, so how do they both feel? Because an attitude is how you feel about something, isn't it? It's your point of view, your perspective. So what are the writers' points of view or perspectives on the places that they have visited? I'm hoping that you've actually already got a lot of the answers here from either completing the 3 things that they think about Verona, 3 things that he thinks about Blackpool, and also in question 5, you should have written down 2 things for each one in your own words. So all you'll need to do is you could use what you've used in question 5, but you'll just need to add the quotes. I'm going to start you off with 2 examples, which you are more than welcome to use. But once you've looked at these examples, you then must pause the video and complete your own work. Remember, there's no point in just spinning ahead, looking at the exemplar answers and then copying them down, because that doesn't help either of us. Okay, the first point I would make is in Bryson's text, so you can talk about the text in whatever order you like. He is baffled as to why Blackpool is so popular. That's my point. How do I know that? Well, because he says it's ludicrous that it's more popular than Greece. Now, obviously, the word ludicrous means that's ridiculous. You know, that's crazy. So I'm saying that he's baffled as to why it's so popular. My next point, conversely. So that means the opposite. In Dickens's text, he is in awe of Verona, as in he thinks it's awesome, because he refers to it as beautiful and charming. So what we've done is we've done a comparison. We've compared their attitudes, haven't we? Bryson thinks he's baffled as to why it's so popular. He thinks it's ludicrous that Blackpool's more popular than Greece. Whereas Dickens actually thinks Verona's amazing. He's in awe of it. How do we know that they think that? Well, because he uses words like beautiful and charming, and they're both very positive words, aren't they, with very positive connotations. Now, what I would continue to do now is I would go back to the Bryson text and make a point about that. Then I would go back to the Dickens one, and I would do Bryson, Dickens, Bryson, Dickens, Bryson, Dickens, until I'd done 4 for each one. And that way you can sort of use your discourse markers. So your conversely, however, on the other hand, similarly, if they have a similar point, and it'll flow really nicely. The other reason that I would do it this way is doing Bryson, Dickens, instead of doing all of Bryson and then all of Dickens, is because in an exam situation, and I mentioned earlier, a lot of people run out of time in this question. So if you make 4 points about Bill Bryson, that's 4 marks, and then you run out of time, you've made no points at all about Dickens. Okay, and there is something in the mark scheme that says if you don't mention both the texts, you're limited in the marks that they'll give you. So even if you make loads of points about one text, but you don't get a chance to make it about the other, they might not give you the full marks because you haven't talked about both texts. So it's always better to do one than the other than one than the other like that. Okay, just in case you're going to run out of time. Obviously, it means that you're going to be flicking from the Blackpool text to the text about Italy and back again and back again. But if you were in an exam, that would be the best way to do it. And of course, you would have both of those texts in front of you and you would be able to highlight both of those texts that way. I appreciate that working on a computer is a little bit fiddly, isn't it? So let's say we're on the Bryson text and we want to highlight something here. So like the "It never stops being ludicrous." We've got to fiddle around and press these buttons, and then we've got to do that, and then we've got to click back on something else, and then we've got to look at the other one, and then we've got to go back to our answer sheet and write it down. So I know it is going to take you a little bit of time, but I do want you to only give yourself 20 minutes and see how far you can do in this question. Those of you that handwrite in this, you might find it a bit easier if you're writing on paper. Now, as always, your target is to make 8 points. So we're going for 4 for each text, remember. 8 points would be a really, really good marker for us. If last week you could only write 4, your target obviously is going to be to write 5. If you got 5 last week, you should try and write 6 this week, and so on and so on. Please don't just write the 2 examples and then turn in your work, because that shows us that you haven't even attempted this question. It's better to attempt something and maybe get it wrong, and you know, and be completely on the wrong track than do nothing at all, because at least then we can see, oh, you've not understood that, so we need to do some more work here. Yeah. All right, so question 6, you're going to compare the writer's attitudes to the places they've visited and how the writers get across their attitudes to the reader. You've got 2 examples there to start you off. Pause this video now, give yourself 20 minutes, join me in 20 minutes, and we'll go through some of the answers. All right, well done, everybody. Hopefully you've had a good go at that. And if you had any problems, you have gone on that Google Meet and you've had a little bit of a one-to-one with your tutors that are there. I'm just going to go through some of the answers that I wrote down when I had a go at this. So what you need to be doing is you need to be looking at your own answers now, checking them with mine and thinking, oh yeah, I've got the same ideas there, or oh, no, I didn't see that quote. I can see why Michelle's used it though. These exemplars also, they're useful for when you do the self-assessment at the end, just to see, you know, yeah, I'm on the right track, or no, I think I need to do a bit more work here. So I've gone back to Bryson because I started with Bryson, then I talked about Dickens. So Bryson thinks Blackpool is dirty and unsophisticated because he jokes it has more public toilets than anywhere else in Britain, except they call them doorways. So of course, oh, I've missed the speech marks off the end of that one, apologise. So how does he get that attitude across? Well, he's making jokes, yeah, or his humorous tone, you could have said. You could have just said Bryson thinks Blackpool's dirty and unsophisticated because he says, okay, but the fact if you're saying he jokes about it or his humorous tone, that just shows that you understand a little bit deeper. Okay, next one. Dickens, however, shows he thinks Verona is extravagant and luxurious because he's listing things like marble-fitted churches, lofty towers, and rich architecture. So those things do sound quite luxurious and expensive, don't they? Marble-fitted churches and rich architecture. So one's dirty and horrible and the other one's quite posh, basically. Okay, next. Bryson is mostly disappointed by the illuminations in Blackpool. And here we've got a sarcastic tone. So he says, I suppose if you had never seen electricity in action, it would be pretty breathtaking, but I'm not even sure of that. Yep, I think that's quite funny. So again, he's trying to use humour, isn't he, to sort of get across to us how disappointed and how rubbish he thinks that Blackpool is. Dickens, however, he's impressed by the ancient architecture of Verona. He describes the Roman amphitheatre as great, well-preserved and carefully maintained. So massive difference there. One is disappointed and the other one's very impressed. Ultimately, Bryson feels out of place in Blackpool because he felt tired and foreign. So he feels like he doesn't belong there, yeah, which is what that word tired, which is what that word foreign sort of implies. Whereas Dickens, well, again, it's the opposite, isn't it? He feels very comfortable. He didn't want to leave. He says he could have walked there until now. So he obviously wanted to be there, unlike Bryson. Okay, so I had my two examples, and then I had 2, 4, 6. So I've got 8 points in total, and there actually are lots and lots more. I'm limiting my exemplar answers today because I want to make sure that you are going to do your own and you're not just going to use mine. So I don't want to see all the same quotes as me. I want to see different quotes because there are loads and loads of quotes you could pick out of both those texts that would work really well in comparing the attitudes of both these writers. Okay, so hopefully that's helped a little bit. So the last thing I want you to do is a self-assessment. Please complete this part of the video. Lots of people are not doing it, and I'm not really sure why, because I've told you before, it is just as important as the other stuff. We need to make sure that we're assessing ourselves so that we know what we need to work on. It's all right if I know what you need to work on, but do you know? So have a look back at your answers. Compare them to mine if you want. Have you talked about the writer's viewpoints in each text? Have you embedded a quote to support every single viewpoint you've talked about? Have you tracked from the beginning to the end of the text? That's something that people often don't do. And have you tried to make a range of different points? Now, the target was 8. Now, we should be at least getting 4 or more at this stage, okay, in 20 minutes. So write down some feedback, and on your answer sheet, so you should have filled in question 5 and then question 6. Question 6 was here that we've just done. So I want you to have a look at the responses, and then you've got the self-assessment bit. So what have you mastered? Actually write something in that space. What do you still need to develop? Please write something in that space. If you're struggling with what you need to develop, have a look at the ideas here. Are you making your quotes too long? Do you need to shorten them down? Are you not embedding your quotes? Are you still writing, this is shown in the quote, or the writer uses the quote? Remember, that's unnecessary and it's just taking up time that you haven't got to spare. Are you not tracking through from beginning to end? Are you taking your quotes all from the first paragraph, for example, and not getting to the end? Maybe you just need to focus on the time and it's making more points in the time, or maybe it's focusing on the question. Maybe you're not answering the question, you're going off on a tangent and you're digressing. So have a look at your work, write down something that went well for you and something that you think you need to develop for next time. So what do you need to do to get better? So pause this video, please, give yourself 5 minutes at least, and just make a note of what I've just asked you to do here on that answer sheet. You can see that here on that answer sheet, the self-assessment. Okay, brilliant. So we've just had a go at question 6, which was the comparison question. So remember, that's where you're going to be asked to compare the writer's views in both of those texts. Their views might be similar or different. It depends what text you get. In the ones we've looked at today, they were generally quite different, weren't they? One was really positive and one was really negative. You need to make sure that you embed quotes from both texts to support your ideas. And remember, the best way to do it is to talk about one text then the other. then one text, then the other, then one text, then the other. So alternate, so that if you did run out of time in an exam situation, you would still have talked about both of those texts. You need to make it clear which text you're talking about. So always just use the writer's surname, remember? So Dickens thinks this, or Bryson thinks that. And you can comment on language, format, structure, tone, or anything else that you want if you feel confident doing so. But remember, it's not essential. And definitely don't just try and pick out language features and talk about them. It's about you understanding the text, not you analysing its literary devices. Okay, so we've looked at question 5 as well. That was the summary, remember? And we've just done question 6, the comparison. And we used quotes in question 6 to support our ideas. Now, the last couple of weeks, I asked you to do this. I'm going to ask you to do it again, choosing a number between 1 and 6. So if you choose number 1, can you write down how you would answer question 5? Question 2, number 2, can you compare how question 6 is different to question 5? That's an interesting one because you're going to be practicing the actual comparison skill. Number 3, can you summarize how to answer question 6 to somebody else? So again, unless you're talking to somebody else on the meet or over the chat, you'll just have to write this down. If you chose number 4, can you list 2 things you feel confident doing in question 6? If you chose question 5, what don't you need to do in question 5? See if anybody was listening earlier when I was talking about question 5. Or if you chose number 6, can you explain 1 thing you still don't understand, either about question 5 or question 6? Okay, so final task of the day, choose a number between 1 and 6, and whichever number you choose, follow the instructions next to it. Pause this video now, write down your number 1 to 6 and the instructions, or the answer to the instructions next to it. All right, thank you very much for your hard work today, much appreciated. What you need to do now, need to make sure everything's in order, so just go to your answer sheet, make sure you filled everything in, and then you need to go back to your Google Classroom. I know mine looks slightly different to you, but go back to wherever your assignment is and find that big purple turn it in button and turn in your work for today. Any questions, anything you want to talk about, jump on that Google Meet with your tutors and they will answer anything that you need. Okay, thank you very much and I will see you next time.